welcome back to another episode of Over the Glass. I am your host, Jay. Nessa cannot be here this week, but we've got Jude on. They're a contributor as well to Hockey of Tomorrow. So welcome to the pod, Jude.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here. Excited to chat.
So if we can start out by letting the folks know who you are, how you identify, and how you got into hockey.
Yeah. So I'm Jude. I use they them pronouns. Um, I'm based in DC right now, but I'm originally from northern New Jersey, which is not surprising. And I'm very proud of being from New Jersey, and it's a big part of who I am. Um, I'm actually a lawyer. I just graduated law school in May and just passed the bar in September. And I'm currently doing some civil rights and employment law and hope to kind of stay in that area. So that's kind of who I am. But in terms of um, how I identify, I mean, like I like to use umbrella terms. Like I just like to queer everything up. I'm like any space that I'm in, especially I work in a very traditionalist kind of conservative industry in the law. And for a while, I was trying to kind of fit myself into a box that would be tolerable and acceptable in that community. And then I realized eventually that I was going to stand out no matter like what space I was in. So I just like to, challenge folks to kind of think about norms and spaces that they have and just like queer them up. So I just like that. I'm also Jewish. That's like a big part of my identity in my community too. And in terms of how I got into hockey, I like to say that I've been a hockey fan my whole life. Um, I
I saw the
recently was
pictures.
yeah, I was gonna say I was recently visiting my
Adorable
mom.
pictures.
She whipped out the photo boxes as moms do. And it's really funny because like I wear like a backwards Devil's hat, I would say, 6 out of 7 days of the week if I'm not at work or in a situation where that's not appropriate. And I saw these pictures of me, 3, 4, 5 years old, wearing backwards Devils hats, like with these Devils jerseys, and I didn't even realize that I had been doing this long. And I don't know if you've had this experience, like as a queer person, like as a non-binary person, of you know I look back on these pictures of me from when I was a little kid, and I'm like, first of all, how did nobody know, right? How did that little kid like dress like that, and no one said, hey, wait a second. But also it's kind of fun to see myself today. I just turned 30, and I see this 4-year old, and I'm like, yeah, like that's me. Um, but yeah, my grandfather was born in Montreal and started being a hockey fan there. Sorry, this is Princess Batman. She wants to participate. um, uh, and he got my dad into hockey, and so my dad had season tickets to the Devils when I was younger. His company did, and so whenever they didn't have clients to bring to the games, he would bring my brother and I. Um, and so, the Devils were really good when I was a kid. I was a little too young to remember their first Stanley Cup in '95, but in 2000, I was 7, and I remember going to a triple overtime Stanley Cup final game against the Stars. The Devils lost the game, not the series, fortunately. Um, but yeah, so I grew up going to these Devils games, and it got to a point eventually where I went to my dad and said, "Hey, when do we get to play and not just watch hockey?" Um, so my brother and I started playing for a couple years, and unfortunately, my hockey career ended when I broke both my wrists within the span of a week of each other. Um, Doing not hockey related things too. Like I just tripped and was a klutz.
Aw.
But between that and the kind of cost of playing hockey as a kid, and especially in New Jersey, a lot of the games were in upstate New York, in Pennsylvania, in Connecticut. We had tournaments in Canada. There was a lot of travel and costs associated with it, and it was not accessible. Um, so that kind of ended my hockey playing career. But I have remained a fan to this day. And yeah, that's how I got here.
Can you give folks a little sneak peek of what you're going to be bringing to Hockey of Tomorrow?
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, just like in a kind of most basic sense, I really like stories. Like I like to consider myself a storyteller. It's both a Jewish tradition because we've never really been able to write our history down that much because it keeps getting destroyed as Jews have been persecuted throughout history. So like oral storytelling is like a tradition amongst Jewish people, and so it's something that I've always kind of found as part of me. So I hope to kind of bring that to hockey tomorrow. I like telling stories. I think that's what endears people to things. Like for me, a big part of loving hockey is the storylines behind the teams, behind the rivalries, behind the players. And it turns into these really compelling narratives that gets you so invested. So I'm hoping to be able to tell some of those stories about, voices and perspectives from hockey that you don't hear about as often. So maybe some cool podcasters, hopefully looking at some things around like racial and social justice issues as well. Like I'm not quiet about my thoughts around ways that the league has handled, ways that the NHL in particular has handled racial and social justice issues. I think there's a lot of room for improvement. So I'm going to be looking at some of those efforts. Um, and yeah, so hopefully mostly around those kind of storylines.
Nice. Hockey Tomorrow is launching in a couple of weeks, I think, on the 23rd now. I think
I
that
think
the
so.
date has changed a
Yeah.
little bit. So check that out. Follow Hockey of Tomorrow. There's going to be a lot of great content, a lot of great contributors that have been brought up to the platform.
Yes.
I did want to circle back to what you were talking about with growing up and now looking back on like those photos and stuff because our interaction on Twitter earlier this week.
Yeah.
I also shared a photo of myself and
Hmm.
I don't know
Also very cute.
where that started out, but I thought it was just like a fun little
It started out as someone saying, I think it was like, oh, like children can't be gay or something. And then it
hmm
was like photos of me as a child.
Yeah,
And then everyone
right.
kind of posted the pictures of them as a kid that just screamed, this is a gay person. Like,
Yeah. Like I remember when I was growing up and I was always labeled the tomboy and I'm just like,
mhm,
sure, if that's what it is, like growing up, I grew up mostly in the late 80s, 90s to, age myself. Um so, at the time, I really can't tell you outside of maybe once I got into like anime and things like that is where I kind of saw some kind of representation. But as we've
mhm.
talked about in a previous episode, where like even something like Sailor Moon, they like made the lesbian characters straight, and I'm just like something is not. My 16-year-old brain is like
Right.
that.
You're like,
That looks that's not how me and my sister interact. So I don't,
right.
So it was there, but because of homophobia, they they were like, well, we've got to change stuff. We can't be showing this to the kids. This is not PC. This is not normal and
Right.
whatever. And what started this podcast for me and Nessa is a project that Brock McGillis and a number of folks in the queer community during Pride Month, where the NHL yet again failed us, and we decided, well, we've got to take this into our own hands. We've got to get stories out there of queer folks in hockey because they're everywhere. So
Mhm.
you can't tell me you can't find these stories. They're right here.
Right.
You're just not trying hard enough. And so I figured, might as well like tell my story. Given the opportunity to really dissect that, I started even bringing up things like in my childhood and like realizing I look back now and I'm just like, there were all these signs, but I didn't have the language for it. I didn't have the
Yeah.
representation. And it's like a part of me is envious of the kids growing up these days. I mean, there's a lot of things that I'm not envious of. Like, I'm glad I didn't grow
Right.
up with social media because I read a tweet just a bit ago from yet another one of our contributors, Ashley Muzan, tweeted about how there's families who make whole YouTube channels of their family life to the point where there's lack of
Right, I saw
consent
that.
with their kids, and now some of their kids can't seem to get out of the spotlight because their entire family's life is wrapped around it. And I'm like,
Right. And
that's
your
insane
whole
to think about.
childhood is plastered all over social media. I mean, the
Right.
pressure that, that must come with that too. I can't imagine.
And like, I've had photos and I've had embarrassing stories been told about me like growing up. So it's like that's one thing. But it's like
Right.
having it out there for people to like comment on, to retweet. I mean, we already have to deal with it day to day with just like the homophobia and transphobia and like the misogyny within the sport and then the greater scope of society. So having to grow up with that during your formative years, I'm like, there's no way. But not to get incredibly off track, but it's like when we bring each other onto this platform and we have these conversations, like the intersections of our stories are there, and I mean that's what we kind of want to put out into the world, because especially in this sport we don't see enough of it, and the sport needs to platform these stories more, because like we're going to get into later on in this episode, all the pride related stuff that announced that whole article that I had to read twice, and I didn't even properly prepare it as much as I wanted to from the Athletic, but we'll make do.
Yeah.
um but one of the main reasons we wanted to bring you on was recently, as folks know, me and Nessa are Sharks fans. Recently, we traded away Timo Meier. And Timo Meier went to the New Jersey Devils. So, how's he doing? How are you enjoying? Because if you're
um
not enjoying, we will take him back.
I did hear y'all say that. So I want to hope that you don't follow many Devils fans on Twitter, because
I think
some
you're the
of them
one that I follow.
good, because a lot of them like to just, I mean, hockey fans, they love to complain about everything and anything. So, coming in, we knew that Timo was hurt, right? He hadn't played for a while. And then he's, flying to the other side of the country. The team has been, the Devils' schedule is really hectic right now. So they haven't even had a full practice with Timo. He's just kind of been thrown in there. He did score in his first game, in his first period, in Arizona, which was incredible. I was unfortunately on a plane when it happened, but I did the ridiculous thing of putting my phone on Do Not Disturb, so I didn't see the score until I could get home and watch the full game, and screamed very loudly when he scored. Since then, he's definitely like struggled to fit in a little bit. Um, I think, Jack Hughes has also been kind of off recently, and the two of them have been playing together as I was hoping, and a lot of Devils fans were hoping that that Timo projects to be kind of, exactly the kind of player that we think could, ride Jack Hughes's wing for the next, 7, 8 years or something, and really just bowl teams over. But there's some speculation that Jack's hurt, so he hasn't quite been doing his usual wizardry, and I think he's also maybe trying to pressure, force the puck to Timo so that he can kind of get his shots off. So it's been a little like helter skelter. They haven't quite figured it out. But and I have to say, Timo did take two really bad penalties. Recently, he took like a high stick in the last couple of minutes of a game against the Leafs that led to an Austin Matthews power play goal that was the game winner. And then last week, the Devils were playing the Capitals, which I was actually at that game, which was really great to get to see him. And he took a really bad tripping penalty in the last 2 minutes of the game. Fortunately, the Devils killed it off, and then he scored the shootout winner in the shootout, so that was also pretty great. Um, but I mean, yeah, I already love him. I think Devils fans had been kind of thirsting over him for a while, even before this trade deadline, just because of the Swiss connection with Nico, to seeing them play together internationally and seeing them play well together. Um, Also knowing that we've been looking for a power forward for a while, because the Devils' offense is very skilled but quite small. And even the players that play with physicality, Nico Heischer and Dawson Mercer, like they'll go to the dirty areas, they'll be hard along the boards, but they're not big guys. And they don't, Timo automatically became the team leader in hits when he joined the Devils. Like, we don't have any players like him. Um, so I already knew that I was gonna love him. He's done some, finishing out his hits, playing with physicality. That toe drag that he has every time, I'm like, that is just filthy. Oh my gosh. Something that's really surprised me that I've been impressed with that I didn't realize was just his ability to carry the puck in possession into the offensive zone. Because the way that I think he was kind of advertised to us was just, scorer, volume shooter, like park in front of the net kind of person. But seeing him be able to really like carry the puck into the offensive zone um, and make plays like that has been like really cool to see. So I think it's just a matter of time. I'm hoping maybe tonight, big Devils game tonight, playing the Hurricanes, potentially to tie for the first in Metropolitan Division. Really hoping that tonight's the night where they just kind of like magically spark together and explode for 5 goals or something ridiculous.
And with Timo's becoming where he's an RFA this season, we already know how much like it's gonna cost to keep him, and it just really we're just not for the Sharks, they're just not there. There's
Yeah.
no reason to keep a player in their prime where the rest of the building blocks aren't there. And I get it. He's homegrown. He's one of the best on the team. It's just it's crappy, but I think I'm just gonna have to be okay with the trade. And out of all the teams that were interested in him, I'm really glad that the Devils got him.
Me
I'm
too.
still incredibly angry with the Rangers right now. Um, I
That's
don't
my
know if
whole
you
life
play.
mood.
Yeah, well, I mean, are you guys are in the same division, right? Or am I do
Oh
I got
yeah,
that
no,
wrong?
the Devils and the Rangers rivalry, and we're the Devils and the Rangers play about maybe an hour away from each other. The Devils in Newark and obviously the Rangers in Madison Square Garden and Manhattan. And we've always been like the ugly stepchild of the New York hockey media market and always get compared to the Rangers. And it's like, Artemi Panarin, for example, it was like the Devils were in the running for him, but of course he's never going to choose the Devils. Like he's going to choose the Rangers, right? Everyone wants to play in New York. No one wants to play in New Jersey. So I have always hated the Rangers, and they just keep giving me more reasons to, honestly.
So rivalry for the Sharks, I'd say over the last 2 decades, maybe not in the most recent since Vegas came into our division, were primarily SoCal teams because it's just
Mhm.
classic NorCal SoCal. It spreads across every sport. Would you consider the Rangers your like primary like arch nemesis rival, or like what's the vibe like in that
No, the
area?
Rangers are high key our arch nemesis rival. I think the term that a lot of Devils fans uses most hated rival. Um, and I'm actually, kind of the Devils and the Rangers had some very contentious playoff matchups back in the late 90s, back when both the teams were really good, right? The Rangers won the Stanley Cup in 94. They went past the Devils to get there. That was the series where Marc Messier guaranteed that they were going to win in 7 games, and they did. And then the Devils went on to win the Stanley Cup the next year. In 2012, on the way to the Devils' last Stanley Cup final appearance, we beat the Rangers in the Eastern Conference Final, I think, and that was a huge moment of Devils fandom history. And of course, the Rangers have not won a Stanley Cup since 1994. The Devils have won 3. Um, so, but now it's gotten back to the point where the Rangers have been, an up and coming team over the last couple seasons, and it's been hard to watch as the Devils were god awful for the last kind of 5 years or so. But now that the Devils are kind of on the up and up again, I think it's actually it's going to be really fun to see this rivalry kind of come back to life. And the way it's looking is that there might be a first round matchup between the Devils and the Rangers, depending on right. The Devils are second in the Metro right now, and the Rangers are third. So unless the Devils can overtake Carolina for first, it's going to be Devils and Rangers in the first round. I don't know if I can like. I'm going to be so stressed out during that whole series because whoever wins, the other side fan base is going to be absolutely insufferable, and it's going to be awful. But it's a very, in addition to just the hockey contention, right? There also is this, the Devils play on the wrong side of the Hudson River. There's always, even this year in media, somebody, I can't remember who it was, but somebody brought up kind of Jack Hughes being in the MVP and the Hart Trophy conversation. And there was an analyst who said, no, he plays on the wrong side of the river. Like, he'll never be in that consideration because he doesn't play in this big market. And it's like, no matter, the Devils are the third best team in the league right now. They're this great story, and even with all of that, we always are going to get knocked off for being in New Jersey and not being in New York. So it's a little bit of an underdog thing, and kind of, right. Patrick Kane demanded to be traded to the Rangers because he didn't want to play anywhere else but except in New York. New York will always have that draw uh, for players, and so that's a little bit of a chip on the Devil's shoulder, I think, as an organization. Um, but I did want to offer some optimism and some hope in kind of that timeline of rebuilding that you were just talking about, because listening to you guys talk about it last week, um, and even just seeing this trade, it really reminded me of where the Devils were a couple years ago. Um, Right. So in 2018, the last year the Devils made the playoffs, Taylor Hall won the MVP because he single-handedly dragged that team into the playoffs. And the Devils, that was the first time they had made the playoffs, I think, since the 2012 Cup run. So it had been a while. That was the first time in the past 10 years, in the entire past 10 years, the Devils had made the playoffs after a similar kind of run of 20 years or so. And we thought maybe this is finally it. This rebuild is over. Like, we made the playoffs. We lost in 5 games to the Lightning, and the next year we're terrible again. So in 2019, we traded Taylor Hall, right? MVP, first MVP Hart Trophy winner in Devils history. We traded him to Arizona for 3 prospects, a 2020 first round pick, and a 2020 run third round pick. And I was doing some research on this trade again, and I found this quote by an NBC Sports reporter, and I wanted to read it to you because this could be about the Timo trade. So just listen to this. It said, uh, "Is it a great return or even a good return? No, it's not. It is quantity over quality deal, as none of the prospects involved project as top line players." Right. Um, so I think a lot of Devils fans felt similarly to, we were like disappointed that we had to trade away our MVP winner, that we didn't get any big prospects out of this. Um, but what that has turned into, one of those prospects, Kevin Ball, is now our sixth and seventh defenseman. He's a rookie this year, and he looks like he could be a pretty good like top four defenseman. That 2020 first round pick was Dawson Mercer. Um, and that 2021 third round pick, Tom Fitzgerald, flipped to the Capitals for Jonas Siegenthaler, who is now a mainstay on our top pair, signed a very team friendly deal, and is going to be a mainstay in our defense for a long time. So those are three big pieces to where this team is right now that came out of that Taylor Hall deal. Um, and so I just wanted to offer that as like optimism for the future, as like you're patiently kind of watching this team tear itself down and build itself back up. Is the Devils rebuilds took 10 years, and it was miserable for a lot of it, but now we're finally seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, and seeing how trading away our big players and getting back all this draft capital and prospects, has turned out for the better. So I'm really hoping that's like where this is going with the Sharks. That's what I felt. This deal felt like the Taylor Hall deal to me. I think, I'm happy to talk about some of the prospects and stuff that y'all got back, but I did want to offer that bit of optimism.
Well, thank you very much. I think a lot of folks will need that positivity. I understand that folks were hoping for some of the names. Like one of the ones you talked about was Mercer. That was one of the ones that got brought up as like rumor, whatever it may be. And I think it was Holtz was
Mhm.
another one that came up. And it's like, yeah, okay, if we had gotten that, that probably would have added like some feeling of like, okay, we didn't absolutely lose this trade. And I understand that when you've got a bunch of picks and you don't know what's going to come from that, it is a little hard to see the light at the tunnel. But we we've got to give it a chance. And we've
Mhm.
got a new GM at the helm. There's positive and negatives to that, mostly because we have no idea what he's going to do. And I'm going to lean on the side of optimism because I don't think he's done. We see what he did last year's draft. He was trying to get I think he traded a higher draft pick in the first round for two later round picks.
Mhm.
And
Right, right.
offhand, some of those guys are performing fairly well in their respective junior teams. So, he's got a certain way that he's doing things, and I understand that it doesn't look great now, but I don't think that was the point. I think this is
Right.
definitely a work in progress. Um and I guess with that, maybe with some more things you can add to what we got in return can help um, increase the mood in Sharks
Yeah.
territory.
Yeah. Um, and for what it's worth, I honestly I thought Holtz was going to be included in this deal. He is the Devils' kind of top offensive prospect right now, but the team is kind of mishandled him this year. He hasn't really gotten a chance to play because the team's been playing so well. And when he has been playing, he's been playing on the fourth line in very sheltered minutes, which is not a role, not a place for a young, offensive scoring talent to really thrive. So he's back in the AHL and lighting it up down there as he does. But I wondered if because I don't think Dawson Mercer was ever gonna actually happen. I think that Tom Fitzgerald loves Dawson Mercer. He's one of those like hockey players that general managers and coaches just like they're like he's a hockey guy, which I don't know what that means, but they like to say that. Um, so I don't know if he was ever actually a potential inclusion, but I think Alex Holtz could have been. And I don't know if Mike Greer wanted Fabian Zetterlund instead because of the way that Holtz has not played well this year. Or I don't know if Tom Fitzgerald's kind of, put the axe on that and said, Holtz isn't included. But for what it's worth, I really thought Holtz was going the other way. I thought that that would have made this deal like a lot more, maybe even. But Fabian Zetterlund, who I think is one of the two key pieces, the two prospects you got here, I think is a really uh, kind of like underappreciated move here. A lot of us were really bummed to see him leave. And a lot of Devils fans were watching the first couple Sharks games he was playing in because we all are rooting for him. Also, he just looks so much better in teal than he did in red. He has like a very like red like skin tone, and the red on the red, it wasn't working for him. And he's Swedish, he's got the blonde hair, the blue eyes, so the teal just like he just looks so good in the teal that I'm really happy for him that he got traded to a team with a good color scheme for his skin tone. Um, but I think that he felt to me a pretty natural, not replacement for Timo, obviously, but he has some similarities in his game, and mostly that he's a high volume shooter. He'll really rip it from anywhere. He definitely needs to work on the accuracy of his shot, but he's got a really good shot. And he's played on our second power play, and he's scored there. He's played on the first line. He's played on the fourth line. He can play up and down the lineup. And what he might not have in skill, he makes up for it in hard work. He's really relentless, um, strong on the puck. He is also so he's 5'11", but he's 220 pounds. And my favorite quote about him was there was an NHL Network game that Kevin Weeks was calling, and the way he described Fabian Zetterlund was that he's built like a small fridge. And I just loved that because it's so accurate. Like he is a tank. He's the kind of guy that, someone else will try to hit and they'll just kind of bounce off of him and fall down. Um, and I think he's like a real character kind of guy too. I took a look at his stats and it doesn't look like he's really put up any numbers for the Sharks thus far. But I'm hoping that once he gets settled, that you guys will really love him as much as we did because he works so hard every night. I think maybe his ceiling is probably like a top end second line winger, but he's probably more like a third line because he's also got some good defensive chops. Um, Also, another part of this was that he's like best friends with Alex Holtz because they were two young like Swedish players playing on the same team. And so I was really hoping they would go together if they did get traded. And I'm wondering if that's part of the transition is he's sad and misses his buddy. Um, but he did go with Andreas Johnson, who's also a Swedish but guy, but more of a veteran player. Um, so the other big piece of this, the prospect, right, was Shakir Mukhamadullin, who I don't know how to pronounce his last name. That's how I've heard it said. uh I speak a little bit of Arabic. I took Arabic in college and have spent some time in the Middle East, and so I was trying to find like his last name written in Arabic to see how it was supposed to be written. But I think it's one of those things that's been translated from Arabic into Russian and then Russian into English, um, and this is what it's come out with. So. Uh, his nickname is either Mookie, is what I've heard some people call him, or just Shakir or Big Shaq or something like that. So he's a really interesting prospect. So in 2020, the Devils had three first round picks. Our first round pick, which was the seventh overall, which was Alex Holtz, and then 18, which was from the Taylor Hall deal, was Dawson Mercer. And then this was a pick from when we traded Blake Coleman to the Tampa Bay Lightning, that sparked their like ridiculous run, and we got their first round draft pick. And so this was the third pick. This was Tom Fitzgerald's first draft as the Devils GM. And he kind of went off the board with this one, right? Um, he was not highly ranked necessarily. Um, I think, and don't quote me on this, but I think I heard somewhere that he is the highest drafted uh, defenseman from the KHL. Like, there's never been a KHL defenseman that's been drafted in the first round. So there's really no like comparable players for him, and I think that's messes with some scouts. They don't really know kind of how to place him. Um, and Tom Fitzgerald did say that uh, he was actually scouting another player in the KHL and kept seeing Shakir playing and said, "Man, who is this kid? Like, why is no one talking about him?" So it's a little bit of like a project pick. But he did, he broke the record for most points by an 18-year-old defenseman in a single season in the KHL, previously held by Dmitry Orlov, who Stanley Cup champion, currently killing it with the Boston Bruins. Um, the KHL is obviously like a much lower scoring league, and he's put up a lot of points as a defenseman. And I think that's pretty impressive. He's big, he's 6'4", he can skate well. He's definitely got some filling out to do. Um, but it's funny because there's some scouts who love him and think this is a steal and he's going to be like a first kind of defense, he'll be your number one D. He'll be a great like puck moving mobile defenseman. And then there are other ones who are like, who is this kid? I don't know, I can't pronounce his name, I don't want to like think about it. So it is a little bit of a risk, but I do think it's like low risk high reward. um and his team in the KHL just lost in the first round of the playoffs, I think. So and he signed his entry level contract last year. And he did say that he was going to come over after his season was done. So y'all should get to see him play soon. I don't know, maybe he played, I think, 2 or 3 games for our AHL team last year, but he's never played in the NHL. Um, so that's kind of like a who knows, but it might turn out really well. The Devils love their big puck moving defenseman. That's like our entire decor right now is like tall guys who can skate, and I think he fits that bill. Um, so there's that. I think the other piece of this was Nikita Okhotyuk, who is a big stay at home defenseman, kind of like projects maybe as like a sixth or seventh D man. He's not like the most talented, but he's big and he will make some great hits. He's just fearless. He's really endeared himself to Devils fans because he fought Tom Fitzgerald's son, Casey, in the minor leagues, and absolutely wrecked him. And we were like, can you just imagine the guts you have to destroy your boss's son in a game? um, and I think Tom Fitzgerald might have even been there to see that game too. So um, another kind of good building block piece. Like he's young, he can be a solid stay at home defenseman. Um, so another kind of interesting piece. And then right, and then there's Andreas Johnson, who I think was more included for the cap dump purposes. But he scored 20 goals with Toronto in 2019. And he had 35 points last year. So he's a veteran. He's fast. He can play up and down the lineup. So I think for a team that's in a rebuilding kind of mode, it's a good opportunity just to have like a solid kind of middle six guy around.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what you're talking about, I know when Greer was hired on and he was asked about, the things you ask about a new GM, like their direction, their insights, and a couple of things that stuck out to me was that he, unlike Doug Wilson and the direction that organization was headed towards was like if you look at our up and comings, we've got Eklund, we've got Bordelot. He wanted, small, speedy, like even the one that
Mm-hmm.
we traded off, or our project, Ryan Merkley, was small but offensive defenseman. So he was really trying to. I mean, the direction that the league is going in, it's getting
Yeah.
faster. It's not so much old timey hockey where you've got like the big dudes that just are havoc to play against, but you've kind of got to still have those folks in the lineup, and I think maybe that's something that we have been hurting us over the years, where we're moving towards these smaller puck moving forwards, but then there's still the sport is still checking evolve, very physical
Right.
and things like
Still
that.
physical, yeah.
So I think with Greer, he's kind of, at least from my perspective, he's trying to marry those two things with the direction that the league is going. And so some of the things that you talked about with those various pickups that we got in the trade kind of feel very like on par with where he's trying to make this team go. And with picking up David Quinn this season, and I mean, maybe you have some insight with like just how things happen with the Rangers, but I understand that was underwhelming for folks in the Sharks fandom. That was one of those things where I was just like, let's just wait it out. I don't want to come in
Yeah.
and just be upset with everything, because our feelings are in the floor. Like I can't be on the floor anymore. I need to find ways to be optimistic for the future.
Yeah.
We need to get off the floor. But and I don't know if this is how the previous coaching staff style was, or if they were just trying to work with what they got. But the last two coaching staff that we had, it ended up becoming a dump and chase, and it just wasn't effective. Our power play wasn't looking great. So now with David Quinn coming into the mix, he really was trying to bring in the style of carrying the puck into the zone. And I feel like, as you talked about with the KHL defensemen, that kind of fits into where I think Greer's trying to go with. I think it was, who was the other player that you're talking about? Zetterlund.
Zetterland, yeah.
The way that he plays. So in the last week, because they've been on the road, I haven't been able to watch too many games.
Mm-hmm.
But I did catch the first two games that they came into the lineup, and there were a few times where I was like, who did that hit? And it was Zetterlund, and I was like, wow, okay.
Mm-hmm.
But you said he's 5'11". I would have never guessed that,
Small
he's a
fridge.
big boy.
He's a small fridge. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm like, wow. And me being a short person, I'm just like, oh, proud. But that's on par with the direction that Greer's trying to go in. So to me, that gives me a sense of optimism. And I mean, yeah, like we just and the ones that we're unsure of, the ones that currently we don't know who he's gonna pick, we just got to kind of roll with it because it's a new era. We've got to tear it down somehow. I saw last game the owner of the Sharks was in house, and I was just like,
oh yeah.
well, I hope he understands that it's gonna. We need to make these changes because this team is just looking worse and worse, and the attendance is getting further down the hole. But you know,
When I say I feel you, like you're describing what the Devils were like 3 years ago. There's been
mm-hmm.
this picture circulating on Twitter of the Devils lineup from 2019, and it was just an AHL team. You would not recognize who we had on our top line. It was absolutely terrible. No one was coming to see the team play. And it's right, it took a couple of years and then also like the draft picks that came the other way in this trade too are not to be discounted, right? I mean, this draft class is projected as going to be like really deep, and having multiple first round picks in this draft is huge. Like you never know who's going to come out of that. And that 2024 maybe first round, maybe second round, depending on how things
That
work
was so
out.
confusing.
I also thought it was hilarious that in the Devils press release, they called it a conditional 2024 second round pick, and in the Sharks press release, they called it a conditional 2024 first round pick. Kind of like depending on how you see it, kind of thing. Um, but yeah, so I hear that, and like I totally feel you, and having patience in hockey is hard because we don't have any control over these things. We just have to sit and hope that these people in an office somewhere are making choices that are for the best interests of the team. But I do think, like what you were saying, um, I think we're seeing the league transition to faster, a little bit smaller, a little bit more skilled, and also having defensemen who can play up, right? Like Cale Makar really kind of took the league by storm because he could be that fourth man in, and play just as well as any forward. The Devils' defense is extremely active. They jump up into the play. They take pucks deep. I mean, Dougie Hamilton's like almost a point per game player right now. Same thing with the Hurricanes, who are really good. Like I think they have the most points by a defenseman this year is the Carolina Hurricanes. Um, so you're like you said, you're seeing this transition to a different style of defense than what the Devils were known for back in the day, which was just big bruisers shutting stuff down. So I definitely think, from my 200-foot perspective, like it seems like the Sharks are heading in the right direction. And it's like it's not easy, right? Like it's awful to watch your team be terrible and just think, well, the future's bright. Can't wait for 2026, right? Like, but hopefully you can see like for the Devils, like it felt like that was never going to come, like this moment was never going to come, and here we are like almost battling for first in the division on March 12th, which was we had the second overall draft pick last year. Okay, this team was bad. Um,
Your
so
team is the reason why there's a new rule in the draft.
I mean, yeah, I get it, but I'm also happy that we have both Luke Hughes and Simo Nemec. So, um,
So before we move on to some other things, I did want to get your predictions of where the Devils will, how far they'll go in the playoffs, and your picks, I guess, in this moment of who will be in the cup. Both, so two categories we did this last episode: the want category and the realistic.
um, yeah, I've been thinking about this all morning ever since I listened to your last episode, and I still don't really know what my answers are going to be, but we'll see in a second. As far as the Devils' playoff run, uh, it's hard because we entered the season with the goal of playing meaningful games in March, meaning we just wanted to be in the hunt for a playoff spot. No one thought that the Devils would be at the point that they're at right now. So naturally, that means that some of the expectations have risen, right? Um, I would love to just see them get out of the first round. The last time the Devils made the playoffs in 2018, they won one game, and everyone was like, "Yay, woohoo, so much fun!" And then just got destroyed by the Lightning. Um, so I'd really love to see them, depending on who they're playing, right? If they do manage to take over the Hurricanes and get to play either the Penguins or the Islanders, I think the Devils could easily win that series. I'm a little more scared of the Rangers, so I don't know how to feel about that. But I think the Devils can definitely win a round or two. I do think that, they are really young. Most of our core has never played in the playoffs or only played one game in the playoffs. We did trade for some experience. Andre Palat, two-time Stanley Cup champ now. Eric Holla, who's strangely gone to the playoffs for like 10 straight years on various different teams. Um, and Timo has been to the playoff with the Sharks, a couple years ago. So there is some experience mixed in here and there, but the real core of our group, Jack Hughes, Nico's only been to the playoff once, Jesper Bratt, like Dawson Mercer, all of these guys have never been to the playoffs. So I do think that they need to lose to really experience, the heartbreak of playoff loss before they can make an extended run. And I'm okay with that. Like, as long as they make the playoffs and win like one game, I will be happy. I'd like to see them get into the second round. I'd like to see them be really competitive against some of these teams. I don't expect them to get to the Cup Finals. Like, I just don't think that's going to happen. I would be delighted if it did, absolutely. Don't get me wrong, but I just don't see it happening this year. I'd love for them to prove me wrong. Um, but for me, it's nice because um, this is just the beginning, right? This team is so young and so talented, and we have, a lot of our big core pieces locked up for the next 7 or 8 years. So I just hope this is the beginning of like a decade of Devils hockey being Stanley Cup contenders. So I'm still focused a little bit on the future. I'm enjoying what we have right now because it's been a long time since we've had fun hockey. Um, but that's where I'm at with that. Um, in terms of my picks, so with that aside, setting the Devils making the Stanley Cup final aside, I would love to see Leafs Oilers Stanley Cup final. I just think the entire country of Canada would lose their absolute minds. I mean, if what that game last night, that was like what the Leafs won 7-5. If that was a preview of what that series could be, Connor McDavid, Austin Matthews, like I just think it would be hilarious. Um, so I think that would be really fun. I also I have a little bit of a soft spot for the Leafs in this kind of in this version of them. I think they deserved to make it out of the first round last year. I think it was bad luck that they drew against the Lightning. I think they have a better chance this year. of making it out, especially with the moves they made at the deadline. Um, so and also like the Leafs have some incredible players. I'd love to see Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner and William Nylander and Morgan Riley, play in the Eastern Conference Finals or something, like play in these really big games, because these are some of the game's biggest players. You want to see them just for like the good of the sport, right? Um, so I would want to see the Leafs come out of the East, um, and the Oilers come out of the West. Um, Realistically, I have no idea. I think the Canes are probably my pick in the East. For some reason, I just feel like the Bruins are gonna fall apart at some point. I don't know why. I just have this sense that the President's Trophy curse is gonna follow them. Um, but I think the Hurricanes are a really strong team, and I think this is their year. Um, and out of the West, I think maybe the Stars are a good pick. I can't remember. One of you said the Kraken would be a great. I would love to see the Kraken in a Stanley Cup final, but again, I don't know if that's going to happen.
I
But
think Nessa said that as a want. She
yeah,
said realistically she chose the Stars, and I chose the Wild mostly because the Western Conference is a bit of a take a dart and throw it, because
yeah,
I just think whoever makes it to the finals is going to get slaughtered by whoever makes it from the Eastern Conference. It is looking ugly.
yeah. But I've heard some folks kind of talking about this as a potential good thing for whoever makes it out of the West, is that whoever makes it out of the East will have just gone through like 3 rounds of absolute madness, right? You're gonna have to get past the Leafs, the Lightning, the Hurricanes, the Bruins, the Devils, the Rangers. Like those are 6 of the top 10 teams in the league. Only one of them's gonna get out of there, so they might be like dead and done by the time they reach the Stanley Cup Finals, and really beat up. So we'll see. I'm very curious to see who makes it out of the West, because, like you said, it's been such a toss up all year. I'm in agreement with both of you that I don't want it to be Vegas. Um, I also I think it's interesting. I'm curious to see what happens with the Avs too, right? Because they were such a powerhouse last year, and they're starting to get healthy again. And I think they're like, even though they're the defending Stanley Cup champions, they're almost a little bit of an underdog right now. Um, so I'm very curious to see what happens there. But we'll see. It'll be fun either way.
Yeah, on last episode, I said whoever makes it out of the West has got to hope that the Eastern Conference finalists has just gone through like seven game
Yep.
rounds, like triple overtime, which is very possible with just how competitive it is over in the East. So,
Yeah.
who's to say? Maybe they just might be crawling in to the finals, and whoever's coming out of the West, depending on how things go, maybe they're fresh and ready to play. So thank you for your insights and contributions to that part of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I did want to talk a little bit about some other things that are going on in the league. I did want to do a shout out to the Q Corner. That is one of our local community for LGBTQ plus services in Santa Clara County. They shared a podcast that one of their members went on, that I think is sponsored by some aspect of Santa Clara, but they were raising awareness that this month is Bi Health Awareness Month. And they had a whole episode related to biphobia, and everybody on the panel identified in that space, and we're just talking about experiences with facing biphobia. And I thought it was really insightful, not only for allies but also within the community, because there is biphobia amongst our fam, who are supposed to be welcoming and inclusive. And so I encourage everyone to check out that podcast. I will try and put put a link out there for the masses.
Yeah, making a
Let's
note of it right
see.
now.
And so one of the positives that came out of this week in the midst of all of the again Pride Night stuff is the Alphabet Sports Collective recently had their fundraiser launch on Thursday, and I just want to put a shout out there that was an exciting day, and then it was a roller coaster because of the Pride Night stuff that came out later on that evening with the Wild, which we'll get into. But I guess just thoughts, feelings related to that.
Yeah, like you said, it's really exciting. I, I've been following Brock McGillis and his kind of efforts over the last couple of years. Like I did an interview with him too as part of that, um, a part of that project. And it's really encouraging to see one the support from different members of the hockey community that came out in support of the collective and of the launch. I know there were some Leafs players there. I know they got a shout out on the Steve Dangle podcast. I know that there's a lot of really great, media members involved, including our very own Chanel Keenan, who is just, as always, killing it on all fronts. It's just really great to see, uh, in light of everything that's happened with all of the Pride nights and all of the kind of difficult situations around homophobia and transphobia in hockey this year, to see an organization like that targeted specifically at creating that inclusive space in hockey. And I'm really excited to see what they do. It sounds like they have big plans, and I'm really stoked to see what happens. And really hope that that can continue to be kind of a bright spot, for exactly what we were talking about seeing people who look and feel like us in hockey spaces, so that we don't have to wonder if this is a space that we can belong in anymore. We can just, people maybe younger than us can just automatically know that they belong there without having to question it.
That is the dream. That is the hope. It's hard to see some days. It's hard to stay positive with some of these things coming out, but seeing that they've been working on it for quite some time, but something about launching a website, having that event, I know it's still, it's not, sport is not going to be as inclusive and as diverse as we want it to be like tomorrow, but something about that just gave me a lot of hope just to see that in action, just to see, like you said, SDPN talking about it on their platform, which is a space that, like, the Leafs have one of the biggest fan bases, and beyond that, SDPN is a, even if you just want to follow sport, the sport in general, like, people gravitate towards them. So to have them talk about it, to have them have a representative at that launch, it's
Yeah.
just it definitely speaks volumes, and I'm optimistic and hopeful that we see more of that, because we do need that. I wanted to also do a shout out to, we don't usually like root for our rivals in SoCal, but the Ducks did a really great job, in my perspective, with their Pride Night. Their organist is trans,
Oh,
and
cool.
their jersey was just gorgeous. Like I won't get it because it's got the Ducks logo on
Right.
it, but it had a heart behind the Ducks logo, and it was the LGBTQ plus colors.
Mhm.
It's really great to see that the organization is, you know, has someone in that space, and from what we can see, proud. She's very proud to represent the organization. So
On a side note, I just recently, I because I went to three different uh hockey arenas in the last couple of weeks to see different games in New Jersey, in Vegas, and here in DC. And one thing that I've noticed is I love organs at hockey games. Like it just feels like such a natural fit. And the Caps got rid of their organist a couple years ago. The Devils still have theirs, but it just brings me so much joy to know that there is a trans organist at hockey games in California. I don't have any feelings on the Ducks, positive or negative. So I mean, I guess I should from the 2003 Stanley Cup Finals, but I was like 10, so um, that just brings me a lot of joy. So I'm really glad to hear that both that they have an organist and that she's trans.
To slightly segue over to queer related thing, but another sport, Megan Rapinoe did a toast to the trans community during her acceptance speech. She was awarded the Times Woman of the Year award, and so her speech was honoring the trans community because some people like to conveniently forget, historically the trans community has paved the way for bringing awareness and advocacy for the queer community. So let's not forget that.
Yeah, trans women were the ones behind Stonewall, so that's yeah. It starts with a lot of trans folks throughout history. Yeah.
So the meat of the Pride chat for today, it comes from the Athletics article. Since the Flyers incident, which trickled over to the Rangers, which really started to put a microscope on, I mean, we've had a microscope on how teams have been handling Pride Night, but that kind of like added more fuel to the fire. But like, okay, now what are we doing? Now you're retracting from the bare minimums of what you've been doing. Now you're
Yep.
digging a hole under the ground. And so I've been trying to sit with some of the stuff that I read in that article, and I guess the tweet that we put out the other day, I think will help to kind of start the conversation. So we said, what about the violence towards the LGBTQ plus community and the trans ban laws multiplying? By the hour in this very country, the silence from the league is deafening. And that was in response to how the teams are supposedly pulling back from having their players wear pride jerseys, specifically because of Russian players on the teams and recent updated anti-gay propaganda laws in Russia, which really, when I read it for the first time, it seemed like two completely unrelated topics that I don't understand how you're trying to tie those two things in. And then as the red rage like subsided from my eyeballs, I'm like, okay, let's try to approach this from like, I'm trying to gather information so I can
Right.
form an actual opinion. I guess for me, it definitely seems like, again, they don't understand what the point is of having these Pride Nights. It still, once again, feels very much for show. I struggle with, there's teams that are doing a lot more than they used to. The Wild had a number of things. Like, I do want to point out that John Merrill
Love John Merrill
invited, yeah, he
and his
distributed
mullet.
out a certain amount of tickets to queer youth. He had a post-game meet and greet. Like, those things are just life-changing for, you know, our younger counterparts. I think if something like that were to happen when I was growing up, it really would have saved me a lot of frustration along the way. So it just, but it's frustrating when this stuff where they were planning to do it and they retract it on the day of, and they don't talk about it until the game is said and done, and the statements are just hollow. it's a lot of word salad that means nothing to me. And to get this article to come out, it just adds more frustration because it again just seems like the effort is more there to protect your assets than it is you're putting in this effort to truly be inclusive and diverse. Um, and as simple as it could be to just use your platform to speak out against all these laws and all the violence towards our community is kind of where I'm at when I read that article.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say that I thought you and Nessa both were very uh I really like just felt and resonated with everything y'all said in your last pod about kind of what these Pride nights mean to, members of the queer community, and why it feels like such a big deal when, you take it out of context. You're mad because they're not wearing a jersey, right? Like it's more than that, right? It's the promise of being seen and accepted and cherished in a community that you put so much of yourself into. And it's disappointing and frustrating when those communities, go out of their way to show you that they really just don't care about you or your existence, or the fact that, the trans and queer communities in the US are under attack. I mean, the amount of laws that are seeking to ban medical care and medical transition care related to trans health, not just for kids anymore, but for adults. It wasn't so long ago in this country that, sodomy was illegal, that being homosexual was illegal. We don't think about that because there has been such progress in the last 50 years, but I read those cases in law school. They're still there, and it wasn't too long ago. And on that kind of note, I think I similarly, saw the headline from the Athletic article, and I think what they tweeted out, it feels like maybe someone should have read that a couple more times, because right, you're like, what does Russian propaganda laws have to do with the Minnesota Wild not wearing a jersey? And I did appreciate that the athletic writers and staff members took the time to speak with professors and experts of Russian politics, about the risks that these players are facing or feel they're facing. And I totally acknowledge that those risks are real. We saw what happened with Brittany Griner. We saw that, Kirill Kaprizov was having some issues getting out of Russia over the summer, although we don't know quite what they were. We saw what happened with Artemi Panarin a couple years ago when he spoke up and then had to take a, mysterious leave of absence. So while I don't doubt that those concerns are valid and are real, I think it's disingenuous to say that's the reason why this is happening, and to say, "Oh, okay, guys, we figured it out. They're not homophobic. It's just Russia. Like, don't worry about it. That's what's going on here." Right? It's like that. First of all, these players participate in military appreciation nights every year. So you mean to tell me that Vladimir Putin is A-okay with Alex Ovechkin publicly and visibly supporting the US military, the driver behind NATO, his arch enemy, but he draws the line at Ovechkin wearing a rainbow jersey for 20 minutes before a game? Um, just seems like there's something fishy there. And also, in the article, the writers mentioned that, some Russian players have, been concerned about their safety and their family's safety, just for kind of living outside of Russia and playing in the U.S. during this time when Russia's kind of at war with the world. Um, and thinking about all of this, to me, I was just like, if this is such a concern for you, for your family and your safety, maybe you shouldn't be playing in the US then. Maybe you should go back to Russia and play in the KHL. Like, if that's really your concern and you want to use that as an excuse for, not standing up for your fans and for, the people that support you, then really commit to that and take that seriously. Playing in the US is not a requirement. Obviously, it's the best league in the world, but the KHL is the second best league in the world. If that's really your concern, and like you were kind of mentioning, um, at, there's so much happening in the U.S. and there's trans people have been murdered at really high rates for years, for decades. We've seen shootings at queer clubs. We're seeing attacks at you know drag story times. This is real. This queer people and people of color too, like, are under threats of violence, and mentioning Russia's anti-gay propaganda laws and completely ignoring the context of the country in which these games are taking place, I think again is really disingenuous. I think, maybe that's one of the reasons why they're not wearing the jerseys. It's because of these Russian laws, but it's not the only reason. And if you're just using that as an easy excuse, like, I just don't have time for it personally. Um, and so while I can see that these writers were really trying to show, hey, it's not homophobia, it's not their personal beliefs, it's the Russian government. Um, there was one brief mention that, could this actually just be a cover for their personal beliefs? Maybe, and then that was it. They moved on. There was no other mentions of, homophobia in the U.S. And like you said, they have these platforms, and I don't see anyone taking a stand and standing up and really promoting what players are doing behind the scenes, like these things that John Merrill is doing, that, like, I know Trevor Van Riemsdyk in Philadelphia was doing some great work too, but the teams aren't promoting that in a way that shows, hey, we're doing more than just wearing a jersey or not wearing a jersey. um, so sorry, that was a lot, but those are all my feelings on this. I would just love to see an acknowledgement that, um, of what's happening in America right now, and that, um, you know queer people and your fans and the people who put money, and time and effort into these teams, are being threatened, and are at risk, and are the subjects of really awful, homophobic backlash on social media. Um, and it would be great to see a team stand up to that, and not in the way that the Rangers social media person did. Um, so.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, pretty much, what we've just talked about in such a, what it feels like we could talk about for much longer. It's a difficult thing to swallow and to allow space for, when you don't seem to be talking about other things that are happening within this very country, but you're very concerned with certain things that are happening in a different country because it affects the players in your league. So and then what you talked about, um, related to, well, it doesn't make sense if they are going to have military nights, which is pretty much, it's not military generally speaking, it's specifically US military, and you've got the players who are participating in that. And so then, okay, if they're going to do that, then why are they so if we want it to make sense, then they shouldn't be participating in that, and then they also shouldn't be standing for the anthems. Shouldn't they be sitting down during the anthems? Because isn't that like promoting that, as folks like to, one for one, to
The
hold
what
space
about it
with,
then? Yeah.
yeah, if you're going to say that the anthem equals the military, then by that logic, then the Russian players should also be not present, not out there at all during that portion of it. So
Yeah.
it's, we're not trying to downplay the seriousness of what's going on and the effects that it's having on Russian players, and an extension of that, and all the stuff that's going on in that part of the country. But we also have to acknowledge that there is so much going on within our own country. And so if you're going to take this stance and say that this equals that, it's I
It just feels like a convenient excuse
mm-hmm.
to get out of putting more thought and effort into the response for this. And like you said, we've seen these statements put out by the teams, by the leagues, and I understand from like a legal, because like, if I have my like lawyer brain look at this, like I understand from a legal reason why the league is so hesitant to say anything, because like, especially with the Provorov thing, when he cited to his religious beliefs, if the league then takes action against him, it could be seen as discrimination based on his religious beliefs. So I see that from the league's perspective, but also from these teams, it's like, and I think some folks like made these really good points during the Provorov incident, was that um, these players have contracts with these teams, right? These are US based corporations that the players have contracts with that are in the US. And they have the ability to say, hey, part of your contract is participating in these team events. And if you don't want to participate in it, then like you can't play. And that would have been a really simple solution to that whole thing, and just say this is part of your job. And now, because of the way the Flyers mishandled that situation and instead stuck up for Provorov, and Tortorella stuck his nose in it and said a whole bunch of nonsense too. Um, Now teams are scared of the public backlash, and are just pulling the entire thing. And it's such a disappointment, and it just feels like, and also, another part of this too was that both the Rangers and the Wilds situations happened very last minute, right? I remember the Rangers players saying they thought they were going to wear the Pride jerseys, and then they got to their stalls and they weren't there. And I believe the Athletic article talked about the Wild situation, was that decision was made the morning of the Pride game. This also feels like something to me, if this was such a big concern, there has to be someone in your organization that's thinking about these things ahead of time. And if there isn't, maybe you should hire someone, because clearly this is something that's going to be an issue moving forward. And I think it's really cool to see what teams have done with the kind of like themed support nights. I love seeing all the different jerseys. I love seeing the different nights honoring different communities. I think that's a really great thing. I think, auctioning off the jerseys is a really great thing. I wish they would make more of the jerseys so that I could buy them and not have to spend $2,000 at an auction, because I don't have $2,000 to spend on a jersey. But I think that's like such a great idea, and such a great way to show that these teams are investing back in the fans that invest in them. And it's this one, like, why is it this one group of people that you can't put the effort into thinking this through a little bit further, and thinking through a solution that doesn't involve the morning of yanking plans that you had already publicly committed to. And I feel bad for the artists who worked on those jersey designs, or the employees who worked on those things, um, to to be promised something and then to get that pulled last minute. And yeah, like you said, it's just so frustrating. Um, and it feels like I'm scared to see where it goes next. Like, what's the next domino that's gonna fall, right? Because it just kind of keeps snowballing. But maybe that's a role that the Alphabet Sports Collective could be taking on. Um, who knows? So, yeah. While I love that, like, you and I can sit here and talk about hockey, and like this is a podcast that you are producing, like that's such a cool thing to me. Um, right, we're still seeing these instances where this sport is showing that they are catering to a very specific subset of their fan base, and they don't really care about the rest of us. And it's really sad.
And the Sharks have their Pride Night coming up next weekend, and me and Nessa have talked about this here and there because it's as you get more into these aspects of the sport, you want to hold your teams accountable. And we've seen a lot of great things from the Sharks organization. And as much as we feel very strongly that nothing will go wrong this this coming weekend, it does in general with all this stuff that's coming out. The team has two Russian players that the count may or may not have changed. I don't know, which is all the trades and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we still have at least two Russian players, and it to look out for your community and to grow the sport when it doesn't feel like the teams in this league and the league as a whole have your back. And like especially what you were talking about with like um, contracts and things like that, I feel like the lack of a, inserting that into their contracts is why we're in a frustrating place, because you could take that step further and really show to your fan base that you have zero tolerance for bringing on someone who's not going to honor the values of the organization. And for the folks who think that politics should not be in sports, well, sports is part of society, so you can't, the folks who would be like,
Politics is
well,
everywhere.
yeah, like you, oh, I just like to watch a sport to escape. Folks that are in marginalized communities, we have really nowhere to go to escape outside of forming these relationships, outside of finding safe spaces. Those are our escapes. But we don't want to huddle in those spaces and mope around and things like that. We want to be within society, and unfortunately the only way to do that is to have to have to take steps forward to make society a more inclusive and welcoming space.
Right.
um
We're not asking for much, right? We're just asking for
mhm
you to show that we're going to be safe in these
mhm
spaces. And what that looks like sometimes is wearing a jersey for 20 minutes beforehand. Um, and it's hard to, I think a lot about, growing the game, and the populations that the NHL should be looking to expand into is exactly like the queer population, is the LGBT plus community. It's all of these like underrepresented communities that they're going to be the ones who are going to be the fans of the future, and you're actively telling them that this is not a space for them. Rather, it's a space for who is your typical hockey fan, which is, an older white man. Um, and and it's hard to, you know explain sometimes to those communities like why these things are important to us, especially for people who have never felt threatened because of their identities, who have always felt safe in any instances, to understand why, a visibly queer person can walk into a space and feel concerned about their safety, but you see a little, rainbow flag out of the corner of your eye and you say, okay, like I can take a deep breath here, like I can be safe. And every human being, no matter who they are, deserves to feel safe in their, spaces. And that's all that we're asking for. And it's not up to you to tell us how safe we are or how we feel safe. Because that's another thing that always bothers me. People are like, well, I would never, harm someone. So, like, that means this is a safe space. It's like, you don't tell me where is safe. Like, I can make that decision for myself. And right now, hockey is not the safest place for queer folks, and it's sad. I can tell my brief, slightly uplifting queer hockey story if we want to bring this back onto a positive note, which I hope she doesn't mind me telling this because I've already used her for Twitter likes. But my younger cousin, I brought her to her first hockey game a couple weeks ago, to a Devils game, and she is part of like a like queer group on her college campus and in New Jersey, and the Riveters reached out to them and invited the group to come to their Pride game on Friday. And so my cousin went to their game with her girlfriend and some of their friends. And the Rivs were wearing these like really cool Pride jerseys, and they got to meet Madison Packer afterwards. Who Packer also gave a great interview after the game on the importance of hockey players wearing these jerseys, and which is, I encourage everyone to go check that out, because if you want a complete opposite of NHL players, Madison Packers standing there telling you how to do it. um but now my cousin like loves hockey, like she wants to go to more Devils games, and I'm so glad to see that she got to have that space, and to know that there's still those spaces that exist. It was just like a soothing balm after the stress of this week and of all the things that came out. So, um, there's still space for young queer fans, and I want them to come into a hockey world where they get to see people who look like them and who feel like them, out there, telling them that they're safe and accepted and welcomed here.
I'm so happy for your cousin and
Yeah.
her girlfriend. Yeah, if you haven't seen that, the I guess it was post game that
Yeah.
Madison had put out that statement about wearing jerseys and being unapologetic about it and how important it is for youth, especially with what's going on right now in society. Um, and I just want to say that I really hope that sparks a fire under some allies, that, like, if you're doing a little bit here and there, we encourage you to reach out and to find other ways from your queer counterparts of how you can be more vocal, because I mean, it's no surprise that Madison Packer is being outspoken about it, but we really need folks who support the community and not have to rely on people who are within the community that live with this day in day out, and it's just their everyday lives. We really need that support from allies, and to be more outspoken than ever, because it's needed. We need more proactive, because with stuff that's going on in society right now, it's like you can't just take this sitting back. um so thank you
Yeah.
for sharing that.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for coming on to the pod this
Well,
week.
thanks for
A
having
lot of,
me.
yeah, really enjoyed all that great information that you're bringing, from the devil's perspective, and bringing your insights with um, just things going on around the league. And with that, do you have any shout outs before we close out?
um, None that I can think of. I just want to say that we'll take great care of Timo, and um, yeah. I mean, I guess I do just want to shout out like all the people who, like yourself and Nessa, and Chanel, and all the people who have been doing all this hard work, for so long, and taking a lot of the weight of it on their shoulders, that, like, we all see the work that you're doing, and providing such a great example for everyone else. So, yeah.
Awesome. So with that, that concludes our episode for this week. We'd like to thank Jude for coming on. And as always, I am your host, Jay, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Take care, everybody.